Two college students who were experienced divers decided to embark on a dive in one of the most dangerous places on Earth, Jacob's Well. However, after taking a wrong turn with their air running out, they could only hope for a miracle. Jacob's Well is a natural spring that flows all year round in the Texas Hill Country. It comes from the bottom of Cypress Creek and is located to the northwest of Wimberley, Texas. This spring sits within Jacob's Well Natural Area, which is managed by the Hays County Parks Department. While the well may look like a beautiful place to explore, it's actually one of the most dangerous diving spots in the world. Its name comes from a story in the Bible, and it has taken the lives of over 8 divers. Despite the risks, many adventurous people still choose to dive here. On the outside, Jacob's Well appears to be just a peaceful spring that feeds into Cypress Creek. Its opening is 12 feet wide, and the well is a favorite swimming spot for locals. But beneath the surface, it's much more complicated. The well has 4 deep chambers that extend far below the water's surface. When you first enter the water, the opening in the creek bed leads to a vertical drop of about 30 feet. After that, the passage slopes down even further, reaching a depth of 55 feet. The first chamber of the well is bright because sunlight can still reach it, allowing algae and other wildlife to live there. However, the deeper chambers are much darker and more dangerous for divers. The second chamber of Jacob's Well is much deeper, reaching a depth of 80 feet. This chamber contains something called a false chimney, which can be very dangerous for divers. It looks like it might be a way out, but it actually leads nowhere and can trap divers who are trying to escape. From the second chamber, there's a narrow opening that leads into the third chamber. The third chamber is a small space filled with loose gravel that can easily shift. Divers have to be extremely careful not to disturb the gravel, or it can make it difficult or even impossible to safely navigate through this area. The entrance to the fourth chamber is even more challenging to access, as it is a very tight passage that only a few divers have ever seen. These divers call it a virgin cave because it is so rarely explored. Inside, the chamber is said to have beautiful limestone formations, but it also is incredibly risky. At the bottom of this chamber, there's a layer of very fine silt. If a diver accidentally stirs up the silt with a kick, it can cloud the water and make it impossible to see, creating a dangerous situation. These deeper levels of Jacob's Well are so hazardous that even experienced divers have lost their lives trying to explore them. 22-year-old Richard Patton from New Braunfels was born on November 20th, 1961, in Orange County, California. Along with his friend 24-year-old Clark McConnell from San Marcos, Richard was a member of an advanced diving class at Southwest Texas State University. Both men were highly experienced and intelligent divers who were working toward becoming diving instructors by taking advanced courses at the university. On the evening of Wednesday, November 23, 1983, at around 8:30 p.m., 22-year-old Richard Patton and his friend Clark McConnell decided to explore the dangerous fourth chamber of Jacob's Well. Despite being very skilled divers, this dive was different from their usual explorations. It was extremely risky. Still, Richard and Clark were determined to dive deeper and reach the mysterious fourth chamber. They suited up with their standard scuba diving gear, including air tanks and lights, and entered the well. As they dove, they passed through the first chamber, where sunlight could still reach them, then dropped into the second and third chambers, going deeper and deeper into the cave. Their goal was to reach the elusive fourth chamber, a place very few divers had ever seen. But when they finally arrived at the entrance to the fourth chamber, things started to go terribly wrong. At about 90 feet deep, they came to a narrow passage leading into the fourth chamber. This passage had been blocked by a metal grate in 1979 after a failed attempt to recover a diver's body. To enter this tight tunnel, divers would need to remove their air tanks and push them through ahead while continuing to breathe through the air hose. It was a perilous maneuver, as no one knew exactly what lay on the other side of the tunnel. Despite the warnings and the obvious danger, Richard and Clark decided to continue their dive. They managed to pry open the gate at the entrance to the fourth chamber, giving them access to the narrow passage. Richard went first. He carefully removed his air tank, pushed it ahead of him into the tunnel, and then squeezed his way through the tight space into the fourth chamber. At that moment, he was venturing into a place that very few divers had ever dared to go. Richard successfully made it into the fourth chamber, but something went terribly wrong almost immediately. Instead of exploring the chamber, he quickly turned around and began to make his way back toward his friend Clark. Alarmed, Clark noticed that Richard was swimming toward him in a panic, screaming and struggling to get out of the narrow entrance of the fourth chamber. It was then that Clark realized something terrifying. Richard didn't have his mouthpiece or his scuba tank with him. Seeing his friend in danger, Clark acted quickly and tried to pull Richard out of the narrow passage. With great effort, he finally managed to help Richard out of the fourth chamber. The two were now in a life-or-death situation. They had to share one air supply through a method called buddy breathing, where one diver breathes while the other holds their breath, something only done in emergencies when equipment fails. Time was running out, and they knew they had to make it to the surface as fast as possible. The two divers began to swim upward, moving quickly through the chambers. They made it out of the third chamber and continued their ascent through the second chamber, but suddenly they hit their heads against something solid. In their rush to escape, they had accidentally swum down a false chimney in the cave, a dead-end passage that traps divers. They were now disoriented, stuck, and running out of precious time. To make matters worse, they heard a terrible thunk sound coming from their scuba tank. It was the unmistakable sound of their air supply running out. At this point, Richard and Clark were trapped and out of air, with no way to breathe. Desperation set in as they realized they were stuck deep underwater, unable to find the right way out. Clark, who had luckily managed to take a full breath just before their air ran out, quickly turned and swam out of the false chimney. Desperate to escape, he fought his way up through the well. Fortunately, he made it to the surface alive after being underwater for about 25 minutes. However, Richard was not as lucky. While Clark was able to find his way out, Richard found himself lost and disoriented in the darkness of the cave. With no air left, he desperately tried to find his way to safety, but the false chimney and the confusing passages of Jacob's Well made it nearly impossible. His final moments were spent in total darkness, struggling to find the surface, but tragically, he never made it out. The following day, on Thursday, local authorities organized a rescue mission. Don Dibble, a local dive shop owner and renowned rescue diver, was chosen to lead the team of 3 rescue divers. This was an especially difficult task for Dibble, as he had personally known Richard. In fact, he had been Richard's instructor in an advanced diving class at Southwest Texas State University that semester. Dibble had even dived with both Richard and Clark before at Canyon Lake, southwest of San Marcos. In his diving classes, Dibble always warned his students to avoid diving at Jacob's Well because of its dangerous reputation. Unfortunately, Richard and Clark had chosen to explore the well on their own, without proper precautions. When Richard's body was finally recovered, it was found stuck at the very end of the false chimney, a narrow passage that had led him into a fatal trap. The discovery was heartbreaking for everyone involved, especially for those who knew how skilled and knowledgeable Richard had been. Unfortunately, his advanced skills couldn't save him in the deadly environment of Jacob's Well. The tragedy could have been avoided if certain safety measures had been followed. If Richard and Clark had used a safety line to mark their route through the cave, Richard might have been able to find his way back out. Additionally, if Richard had had enough air to last just a little longer, perhaps an extra hour, he might have been saved. Sadly, the dangers of Jacob's Well, combined with a few small but critical missteps, led to the loss of a promising young diver. We would like to thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed watching, take a dive on the like and subscribe buttons and hit the bell icon so you get notified when we come back with another exciting cave diving story.